Hey, welcome back to the Fourth Rail. I'm Tom Knighton. Joining me today is my good friend. He is the editor of Bearing Arms. He's the host of Cam and Company. He has the most glorious beard in the entire Second Amendment community. And I am talking about my good friend, Cam Edwards. Cam, thanks for joining me, brother.
Absolutely, man. How are you doing?
Fair to partly cloudy, which is about like the weather's been here.
Yeah, right? Well, excellent. Well, I appreciate the invite.
Oh, no, happy to have you. This is going to be a little weird for me because usually what I do is I have people on to have conversations that I want to have. The problem is you and I literally have these conversations every freaking day.
Right?
Every day we're talking this stuff.
I know. We should find a way to do our morning meeting as a podcast. Because
actually
right?
not a bad idea because we have some really good discussions.
I know. Yeah, every morning Tom and I get together at 8:30. We kick around, the topics of the day and what he's going to cover, what I'm going to cover, and we always end up opining about the stories that we run across. So yeah, you know what? We'll have to try to put that. We'll have to do like a special Cam and Company to see if we can try to put that together.
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, it's not like this technology is that hard to handle. I mean,
right? If dummies like us can do it, yeah.
Right. I mean, we're basically doing that now. We really could just hit record on this and do the same thing. So,
right.
And it should be noted that sometimes we talk about stuff that we're like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, and then when we go to write about it, we forget that one point, and it kind of sucks. So there is some difference between what we write and what we talk about.
Yeah.
So speaking of stuff that we write, you and I both covered this story, the Rahimi case. This is, an interesting case. You want to touch on it a little bit for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so this is a case that DOJ actually requested that the Supreme Court take up. Gun control groups asked the Supreme Court to take this case as well. And it's dealing with a prohibited person, right? Zeki Ibrahimi was the subject of a domestic violence restraining order. He apparently was also the suspect in a series of shootings in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but he had not been convicted of those shootings at the time. So the only prohibition on him owning a firearm was that domestic violence restraining order. His public defenders challenged his conviction under the Bruin test, and the Fifth Circuit ruled that, there is no historical analog to a lifetime prohibition on gun possession if you are the subject of a civil restraining order. So the Supreme Court agreed to hear this case. They're going to have oral arguments probably in the fall, could be early next year, but I suspect it'll be later this year. And it looks like will be the first Second Amendment case that the Supreme Court takes up after Bruin. As you kind of hinted at, Zeki Ibrahimi is not exactly the poster child for the right to keep and bear arms, right? And gun control groups are going to try to put Zeki Ibrahimi out there as the face of the post-Bruin, legal environment, as opposed to what I think the actual question is, which is who are the people that the Second Amendment protects? Does that include individuals who are subject to a civil restraining order, as opposed to a criminal conviction? Does this mean that all felons are prohibited persons, or are we talking about, violent felons, people who have a history of dangerousness? That's also the subject of a case called Range versus Garland out of the Third Circuit. That's another issue that the Supreme Court could address. They could address it in Rahimi. But, this is not a question about what guns can Zeki Ibrahimi own. Can he possess a, quote-unquote, large capacity magazine? This is about, again, when the federal government can say, okay, you can no longer possess a firearm.
Right. And it's important to remember that when we're talking about restraining orders, these restraining orders, domestic violence is often alleged to get restraining orders. It's just in a matter of course for divorce proceedings, for example. Wife is wanting to divorce her husband. We need to get a restraining order because he's violent. Judges default to issuing those orders because the ramifications of not issuing the order can be pretty dire.
Right, absolutely. And this is something that the Fifth Circuit noted, is that, this wasn't a criminal trial. And Zeki Ibrahimi apparently did not dispute or try to contest that restraining order. He didn't have an attorney, right? And in civil proceedings, you don't get a court-appointed attorney. If you don't hire one, you're on your own.
Right.
And the Fifth Circuit took great pains to say, listen, we're not minimizing the harms of domestic violence. We're not saying that it's not a good idea to try to keep domestic abusers away from firearms. What we're looking at is whether or not this particular statute is constitutional under the Bruin test, the history test, the history, tradition, and text test that the Supreme Court laid out in Bruin. And what they found was that there are no viable historical analogs to a lifetime prohibition on gun ownership for somebody who is the subject of this type of restraining order. The court also noted that there were other avenues that the government could have taken if it wanted to deprive Zeki Ibrahimi of owning a gun. He was the suspect in a series of shootings. They could have asked to hold him behind bars while he awaited trial, asking the judge to consider him a danger to the community. That apparently wasn't done. And I think it's also important to note, Tom, that this restraining order didn't work. It did.
No.
Zeki Ibrahimi was caught with a firearm. That's the entire reason why this case is going before the Supreme Court. So the idea that, again, that a piece of paper is a suit of armor that's going to protect domestic violence victims, I think is a falsehood. And Zeki Ibrahimi has shown us that, again, even if you're subject to a restraining order, it is entirely possible, and in fact, perhaps even easy, for you to violate that order and possess a firearm.
Well, I find it funny that so many of the people who say you can't really trust a gun for protection, a gun won't protect you, think that a piece of paper will.
Yeah, I find that deeply ironic as well. Right? Don't rely on yourself and your ability to defend yourself with a firearm, but no, rely on that piece of paper issued by the government and hope and pray that supposedly violent person will respect the words written on that piece of paper.
Like I'm here to kill you. Oh wait, you got a piece of paper. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm backing off now.
Right. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But again, we're seeing how the gun control groups are setting this narrative of the gun lobby wants to arm domestic abusers. Right.
Yeah.
That's how they're portraying this, and soon it'll be the Supreme Court could soon rule that domestic abusers can have guns. And again, that's not the case. Absolutely,
that's
disingenuous.
People who've been convicted of domestic abuse. That's not even this. This is somebody who has merely been accused. Because that's really all the restraining order boils down to, is an accusation.
Yeah, an accusation, not even of past incidents of violence, but an accusation that this person may commit a violent act in the future. And right. You noted that a lot of times, specifically during divorce proceedings, it's not uncommon for a judge to issue these types of restraining orders against both parties, right? Mm-hmm. And so this was something else that the court noted, is that these are often routinely issued, even when there is no allegation of domestic violence present. So, while the gun control lobby wants to focus on Zeki Ibrahimi, I think it's incumbent on us to focus on the actual issues. And that's going to be tough, right? Because the gun control groups are going to be aided and abetted by the media in presenting their narrative. But this has less to do with Zeki Ibrahimi as an individual, and a lot more to do with the challenged federal statute and how it applies to, any American who might find themselves in a similar situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the thing I've been doing when we're talking about it is mentioning Zeki Ibrahimi is not, by any indication, a good person. Right? We're not trying to pretend this is just some innocent law-abiding gun owner who got jammed up. No, the indications are he's probably a scumbag. But rights are rights, and the fact that he's just the test case is unfortunate for us, but it doesn't negate the underlying principles.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. I think the last time I wrote about this at Bearing Arms, I said the question before the Supreme Court is not whether Zeki Ibrahimi is a bad person, but whether Section 922 G is a bad law. right?
Yeah.
And that is the question that is before the court, and the gun control groups are going to do their damnedest to try to obfuscate that between now and the time that the decision is handed down.
Okay. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, speaking of saying something is a bad law, you wrote about Cleveland's mayor, blaming constitutional carry, what he would term as a bad law, uh, for a shooting there. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I have not actually read that one yet.
Yeah, so we had a mass shooting in Cleveland. I think it was Saturday night. There were 9 people shot, thankfully non-life-threatening injuries. Nobody's been taken into custody, so we don't know who's responsible for this, or even who is alleged to be responsible for this. But Sunday, Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb holds a big press conference and basically blames Republican lawmakers for passing permitless carry. Right? He says, this is to blame. And he said, we've seen an uptick in these shootings, not only in Cleveland, but in, I think he said, Cincinnati and Columbus. And it's all the fault of this constitutional carry law that was passed last year. The thing is, Tom, I actually went and I looked. There's a crime analyst named Jeff Asher out of New Orleans. And he wrote a piece the other day about a decline in the homicide rate. And it looks like we're on pace actually for the biggest one-year drop in the nation's murder rate in the last 50 years. Which is very good news.
Oh yeah, especially
right?
the last couple years.
No, exactly. And now listen, this is not uniform, right? There are some cities where shootings and homicides are up. There are some where they're down. And as it turns out, that's the case in Ohio. So yes, homicides have increased over last year in Cleveland and in Columbus, but they're down by something like 25% in Cincinnati. They're down, I think, an even more substantial percentage in Toledo, Ohio. Toledo, I think, actually went, I think it was Dayton that went 2 months without a homicide earlier this year. So, and again, if constitutional carry was to blame for this, you'd expect that you'd see at least a rise, maybe not the same rate, but you'd see this reflected in all of the big city data in Ohio. And instead, some cities are seeing that big uptick, and some cities are seeing a big decrease, which suggests to me that it's not constitutional carry that's going on here, that there are, local issues, maybe regarding police staffing levels, maybe regarding police tactics, community violence intervention programs, who's beefing with who. That's what's actually leading to what we're seeing here in terms of an increase or a reduction in violent crime. But again, for the mayor of Cleveland, he doesn't want to talk about these specific issues and Cleveland specific policies, right? He wants to just try to find a scapegoat. And as a Democrat, he's got to turn to the Republican legislature there in Columbus and say, it's their fault. They're the ones to blame. What's interesting is there is a city council member in Cleveland who blasted the mayor in an email on Sunday afternoon. I guess there was another shooting near this guy's mother-in-law's house. And it was described as a rolling gun battle between, I think, at least 4 gang members over a series of blocks. And this city council member said, listen, call out the 82nd Airborne if need be, but we need a better response. We need more policing in these communities. Said that the mayor is in political quicksand because he is not focusing on, cracking down on criminals. Instead, he's sort of taking this soft approach to, well, let's have, midnight basketball. Let's have youth jobs programs, right? Things that I think are more long-term about, trying to address root causes. Right. Which, listen, I think those things actually have a place alongside, right, targeted deterrence efforts that focus on the most violent, prolific offenders. I think that's the sweet spot when you can do both of those things. And it sounds like in Cleveland, they're kind of dropping the ball on the policing aspect of this, at least from a political standpoint.
Yeah, when you're trying to do a carrot and stick approach, you got to have the stick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's when there was the whole defund the police movement, they were, a lot of people were like, well, we want to take money from law enforcement and put it into these programs that'll undermine the roots of violence. And I'm sitting here going, okay, I've been advocating for that at that point for several years at Bearing Arms. But I'm like, but that takes years to develop any result. That doesn't happen overnight. You got to do something in the meantime. And it sounds like, what you're looking at in Cleveland is kind of the same thing. going back to, you said Cincinnati was something like a 25% drop. And that's, I've been to Cincinnati. It is not, you know, it ain't Beverly Hills. It's like a
Right.
lot of cities. It's got its nice areas, it's got its rough areas, it's got those areas in between. It is a fairly large city with a wide variety of socioeconomic strata within that city. So the fact that you're looking at that big of a drop, that's freaking huge. And yeah, constitutional carry was the problem. At the very least, somewhere like Cincinnati should have held steady.
Right, that's the thing. And so, yeah, so Jeff Asher, out of the 100 cities that he looked at, 5 of them are in Ohio. And so Akron through May 31st, a 12.5% decrease in homicides compared to last year. Cincinnati, 22.22% decline as of July the 3rd. Toledo, a 33.33% decline through June 28th. And then Cleveland, a 33.85% increase in homicides through June 24th. Columbus, a 21.21% increase through July the 5th. So it's all over the place, right? I mean, you've got 3 cities that have seen marked declines. You've got 2 cities that have seen marked increases.
Yeah,
So why would a
huge.
statewide law, right, be responsible for the increases, but not responsible for the decreases? It makes no sense to me. And as for Cincinnati, I'm curious to see, actually, I'd love to drill down a little bit deeper and see if we can figure out what exactly is going on there. But I know one of the things last year, the prosecuting attorney, I think his name is Joe Dieters, announced a policy of no plea bargains for violent offenses in which a gun was used. He said, we're just not doing it anymore. And I don't know if that's still the policy for his office, but I can't help but suspect that that might be having a spillover effect, that all of a sudden now, the street criminals are understanding, oh God, there are consequences. I'm not going to get a slap on the wrist if I'm caught because my buddy just went to prison for 8 years, as opposed to, the 6 months that he was expecting and a couple of years of probation. This is something that I think has a really dramatic impact on violent crime rates. When criminals think they can get away with their crimes, you're going to see more of them. And when criminals think that there's a better than average chance they're going to get caught, I think that does cause at least some of them to hesitate and maybe decide, you know what, I'm not going to pull that trigger, or I'm not going to go rob that store.
Yeah, there's always going to be a subset of criminals that will look at, the situation and go, I'm not going to get caught. I'm too smart. Of course, they never are. Let's be perfectly honest. The guy knocking over the liquor store in Cincinnati or Cleveland or whatever, he ain't part of Ocean's 11. Right. He's not on the cast of the Brazilian Job. He's not that level. He's going to get caught. More than likely, he's going to get caught. But they all, you're always going to have those. But there's a lot of them that will sit there and go, I can get away with it. I can get away with it. Oh, wait, I'm not looking at 6 months. Yeah, maybe I should rethink my life choices.
Yeah, the other aspect of this too, I think, is beyond the criminal. We also have to think about how the witnesses in these communities might respond to a policy like that. Because if you don't have witness cooperation, and there's obviously listen, there's the code of the streets, right? There's the snitches get stitches, but there's also, I think, if you live in a high crime neighborhood, there's I think a distrust with police that they don't take crime seriously. And when you see these bad actors get, caught up in the revolving door of justice and spit right back out of the street, why would you put your own safety at risk? Why would you risk the safety of your family by cooperating with police, maybe testifying in open court, when you know that this violent offender is going to be out 8 months later looking for revenge, right? And so I think that has a chilling effect on the ability to prosecute. But now when you've got a prosecutor saying, listen, we're not going to offer plea deals, we're going to make sure that these violent offenders are put away for as long as the law allows, I think there's a spillover effect on community members who say, okay, they're finally starting to take this seriously. And I think that may be helping, more witnesses come forward, providing that testimony that's actually key to putting these violent offenders behind bars.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. It's because, that's something. There's always bed a troubled certain amount of trouble getting witnesses to speak. They might give a statement at the scene of the crime, but they don't want to peg the bad guy. It's the reason that they do police lineups where you can't see the accuser. You can be able to point out that was him without fear of retribution. But then you have, everyone deserves their day in court. They should, have a right to face their accuser, as they should. The problem is, like you said, if you're out in a few months, and the fact that he's not even going to plead. I used to work at the county jail here for a time. I ran the kitchen. I wasn't a guard or anything. But there was a guy who went to court, was sentenced to 6 months, told the judge, I can do 6 months standing on my head. So the judge went, okay, fine, a year. All right, well, year put him in state pen, which meant he was out in 3 months. Which is why he said it.
Right.
He was trying to piss the judge off so that he could get out earlier. A lot of these guys know what they're doing. They've been in the system long enough. They know the games. But if you take out the idea that, oh, yeah, you're going to get a more lenient sentence. Well, okay, yeah, I may be getting out in a third of the time, but a third of 2 years is a lot less time than a third of 8 or a third of 10. And that changes the math a lot. A lot of these guys are not that stupid.
No, I mean, particularly when it comes to self-preservation, right?
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I think the good folks who live in these bad neighborhoods, they're not stupid either. And when they see that, okay, there is a change being made and the status quo is not acceptable to the powers that be, and they are taking crime seriously, and they do give a damn about what's happening in my neighborhood. Again, I think that has a salutary effect. I don't think it can help but have a beneficial effect in terms of actually being able to prosecute these offenders. But again, this is so far removed from what gun control groups talk about, right? I mean, this is the nuts and bolts of how the criminal justice system actually works. And meanwhile, the gun control groups just say, oh, we need another law. And they don't even want to talk about what that penalty should be, right? We need another law on the books. Listen, we've got I think our criminal justice system is pretty seriously messed up. I think the reforms that the left talks about take us in a wrong direction a lot of times. But we definitely need some work in the criminal justice system. And things like this, I think, are a way to, again, reduce crime without trying to target, law-abiding folks who are exercising their constitutional rights.
Well, I always, going back to, gun control groups saying, they don't, there ought to be a law, and they don't talk about the penalties. You'll also see a lot of anti-gun politicians go, well, we can't arrest our way out of this crime problem. We need gun control. And then that does what? Because you're going to have to arrest people for having illegal guns, right?
Yeah.
If guns, the whole, you can't arrest your way out of this problem is really disingenuous because they're wanting to arrest someone. They just want to change who they're arresting.
This is, I think this is, and I think you and I have both written about this at Bearing Arms over the past couple of years. But the idea that Democrats are sort of at war with themselves on this issue. They love gun control, right? Which by definition is the creation of new laws, nonviolent possessory offenses, right? That come with prison time. And at the same time, they complain about mass incarceration, and we got to defund the police. There was a piece of the Baltimore Sun. I'm actually going to be writing about this at Bearing Arms on Wednesday by a woman named Renee Shanat Fatah. And she was touting Gavin Newsom's proposed 28th Amendment and what a great thing it would be. She is the executive director of a group called Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity. And that group is concerned very much about mass incarceration. And so they work with individuals who have criminal records to get those records expunged, get pardons. I reached out to her, actually emailed her, and said, hey, will you come on Cam and Company? I read your op-ed. I don't want to have a combative interview, but I'm just curious because I can't square this circle of opposing mass incarceration and wanting to put more nonviolent possessory crimes in place. And and she declined to come on Cam and Company. So
Darn.
I know I was disappointed because I didn't want to have a fight. I just
No.
can't wrap my head around this. And I want
Right.
somebody from the left to explain to me how they can rationalize those two positions, because from where I'm sitting, they are at complete odds with each other.
One of something we've covered, that we covered at Bearing Arms leading into Bruin, was the public defenders group actually writing an amicus brief in opposition to New York's carry law, to New York's law, noting exactly what we're talking about, that when you have this regulatory scheme that criminalizes possession, you end up with a lot of people being arrested for possession. And they noted that these are disproportionately young black males. When you're looking at laws, and Democrats, anti-gunners generally will look at the impact of a law and go, well, that law is racist because most of the people arrested are black. Well, if you go by that standard, how is this not a racist standard? By their own rules. Same kind of thing. You really need to well, we have too much incarceration, so we're going to create laws where we're going to arrest a lot more people.
Right. I'm just befuddled by it. If the Democrats were to say, listen, we think that we're putting too many people in prison, we need to get rid of some of the laws that are on the books. Okay, that would be a consistent argument. If they say, listen, I don't care how many people we're putting in prison, it's worth it to have these, very effective and restrictive gun control laws. All right, I wouldn't agree with that, but it would be a logically consistent argument.
Right.
This is not. We need more laws but less enforcement is not a logical argument.
But unenforced laws are just words on a paper.
Exactly. Or subjectively enforced laws, right? Laws that we can apply to that person over there, but that person over there gets to skate. Again, the left says that's bad when it comes to things like second sanctuaries, but it's fine when it comes to, the Philadelphia district attorney deciding not to prosecute more than half of possession without a license cases in Philadelphia. I don't get it. And I just think it's really interesting that apparently there are a lot of folks on the left who don't want to talk about that inherent contradiction. They don't want to have that conversation.
People in politics don't want to talk about contradictions at all. They pretend there's some nuance you're not getting. Well, no, not really. Not on this one. It's pretty right there.
Yeah, it really is. But I listen. I told her you've got an open invite anytime you want to come. And if there are any, I don't know how many gun control activists you have listening to this, but if there are any gun control activists out there who would like to explain this to me, you've got an invite to come on Cam and Company too. We can have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd look forward to it, because maybe we can finally understand this a little better, because their op-eds are not clarifying it for me.
No, they're not. Listen, I'm not holding my breath that anybody's going to agree to come on. I think that we've been at the point in the gun control debate where we're talking past each other for a while now, and I don't see that changing. I do think that gun owners are more open to talking with gun control activists than the other way around, because I think ultimately we're more confident in our position than the gun control activists are. So we don't mind having these conversations. I think they're playing defense because, again, you start digging, you start poking, even if you're not being a jerk about it, all of a sudden their positions tend to fall apart and crumble. And so I don't think that they really want that scrutiny. I don't think they want those probing questions.
Yeah, it doesn't really do well with the Socratic method.
No, not really. No.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about pistol braces. The Biden administration, ATF went, okay, you can't have them on AR pistols anymore. You now have to register them as short barrel rifles and all this other stuff. There's been challenges, now Second Amendment Foundation and Firearms Policy Coalition members are basically exempt from that rule.
And GOA.
And GOA. NRA's filed a lawsuit to try to get into that also for, obvious reasons. But I've got one really important question that, again, is one of those the gun control side hasn't really answered. If I'm inclined to use an AR pistol as a short barrel rifle illegally, why would I necessarily put a pistol brace on that AR pistol when I could put a stock? I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
Someone once described the AR-15 as Barbie for men. Now, I know a lot of women who love their AR-15, so I'm not going to actually say that's 100% accurate. But it is, there are countless accessories, there's countless, anyone can swap out parts at home. I am not a mechanically inclined person. I have switched out pistol grips, foregrips, I've switched out plenty of things. Putting a stock on a pistol is not exactly difficult. Why is it that that this pistol brace is so menacing when somebody who's going to do bad things with it could just put a stock on there and not worry about it?
It's a great question. And again, I don't know that there is a reasonable answer that you're going to find from the other side. I suppose they would say, well, because doing that, put an actual stock on an AR pistol is already clearly against the law, right? That would clearly turn that into a short-barreled rifle. So criminals are, going through this loophole of putting a brace on instead of a stock, but that doesn't hold up because again, we're talking about people who are committing mass murder. So they're not worried about, well, gosh, is this gun going to get me in trouble? They don't care. That's not a consideration for those individuals.
Right. I want to kill 200 people, but I don't want to get in trouble doing it.
I don't want to have an NFA item. Right. I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever. So,
no.
I've thought about this too. And again, from a logical standpoint, I don't have a good answer. I can't channel the gun control activists and come up with something that makes sense to me. But again, I think this is part and parcel of the Biden administration trying to do what it can, as much as it can, through executive action, right? And as you wrote at Bearing Arms, they're not having much luck. I mean, the courts have, to one degree or another, put all of these provisions on hold, right? We now have the nationwide injunction against the frame and receiver rule. Millions of people covered under the injunction against the pistol stabilizing brace. And you've also got the bump stock ban, which of course was from the Trump administration, but that too has been halted by the Fifth Circuit, and I think it's the Sixth Circuit as well. I could be wrong about that, but you've got a couple of circuit courts that have said, nah, this ban was an act of administrative overreach. You've got some other appellate courts that have said, oh, no, this is just fine, because even though this is an inert object, it's a machine gun. Sure, yeah, I mean, it's a machine gun. So I think, again, this is something...
Which is funny, when you look at the definition of a machine gun in the National Firearms Act, it explicitly says more than one round with a single pull of the trigger, and a bump stock does not do that. It does not get around that.
Yeah. No, I know. And I think we've seen, I think those courts that have reached that conclusion have really just sort of created some new definitions that are not found in the Gun Control Act. But this is a strategy that Biden decided to pursue, in addition to calling on Congress to pass a gun ban on like a daily basis. Right? He just gets up and remembers where he is. Oh yeah, I'm president, and then he go ban guns. That is his strategy, and Congress isn't listening. The courts are rejecting this administrative overreach. So I don't know where Biden goes from here. That's the thing. He's already come out and said, I've reached the limits of my executive authority. I'm not sure that I actually believe that he believes that. But
no.
For now anyway, he says there's nothing more I can do. It's up to Congress. I think, trying to make this a 2024 campaign issue for Democrats. So I'm curious to see, where this goes and where his administration tries to go if the courts continue delivering these smackdowns and say, no, you can't do this. This is a void for vagueness, or it's an abuse of the Administrative Procedures Act, and these rules can't stand.
Right. And, it's funny because of, in my take on it, is the whole, well, I've reached the limits of what I can do. If he does anything else, it makes it really easy to frame it as, not only is it an overreach, he knows it.
Right.
Of course, we'll say it. The one downside of a site like Bearing Arms, and this is true of any gun rights site, is we preach to the choir. You know, the anti-gunners will sometimes come over, but that's usually so they can go, which really is what the arguments boil down to.
Right. Yeah, well, like I said earlier, I mean, I think we are at that point in the debate where we're talking past each other. You know, I remember when I was with NRA News, and this would have been like 2007, 2008 maybe, Wayne LaPierre debated Rebecca Peters of IANSA, the International Action Network on Small Arms, at Oxford University. You know, the two sides squared off for a debate on this issue. I don't think you'd have that today. I don't think Shannon Watts would agree to debate Maj Touré or Collier Noir or you or I. It's not going to happen, right? I think and again, I think it's mostly the gun control side that says, no, we've got more to lose. If we actually meet gun owners and we meet Second Amendment advocates, you know, in the arena of intellectual debate, we're going to come out the losing side because their arguments are entirely emotional. If you love children, you'll ban guns. If you don't love children, you'll you know, elevate the Second Amendment over the rights of babies. And that's, you know, that's ultimately their argument. And I suppose it's compelling to those who, you know, desperately want to see a reduction in violent crime, but it's not particularly compelling to folks who, again, look at these issues rationally and say, okay, so you ban guns, and now what about all the, you know, out there who aren't going to give them up, and who you're right, don't care about shooting an innocent 5-year-old when they're doing a drive-by. They don't care about that. They have no respect for human life whatsoever. What about those individuals? And frankly, gun control groups still don't have an answer for that.
No, and it's funny how they'll ignore data. Like, you know, well, the United States has the highest gun homicide rate in the Western world. Yeah, we also have the highest non-gun homicide rate in the Western world. Costas Moros did a really great Twitter thread. I wrote about it, where he looked at the non-gun homicide rate for the United States, and it was higher than the homicide rate, total homicide rate of countries like Japan, the UK. I don't remember where else, but I mean, a number of developed nations, the nations we're usually compared to. There's something else going on. We got something in the water here.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I don't know that you know, I don't know that we're gonna figure that out on this podcast, but it is worth noting, right? That you could, if you could somehow not just ban guns, but somehow magically remove them from American society. You're right. We would still have a higher violent crime rate, still have a higher homicide rate than all of these other developed nations. And of course, my thought is, if we actually banned guns, we would not be able to magically remove them from society, and you would not be in a position where all of a sudden we would turn into Japan. We'd probably turn into Mexico, where, again, it'd be very, very difficult for people to lawfully possess a firearm, very easy for criminals to do so, and criminals would end up having an upper hand not only over, you know, the population, but eventually be in a position to destabilize civil society itself.
Right. You know, and now there's some other stuff going on in Mexico that we don't have a history of here, like corruption, police corruption, etc. But I don't know that it would be enough to prevent something like that.
Yeah, I don't think it would happen like the week after, but
no.
I do think it would end up being, you know, even beyond the prospect of, you know, civil unrest and things of that nature, just the idea that, okay, we're going to take guns away from the law-abiding. Theoretically, you know, criminals can't own guns, but they already can't own guns now, and they still have them. I think the results would end up looking a lot like what we're seeing in Mexico, a place where crime is completely out of control. Good people cannot protect and defend themselves, at least not without breaking the law. And the cartels have the upper hand, not only over the citizenry, but again, in far too many cases, over the police and the military. And they've rooted in to those institutions, right? Yeah. And again, I mean, you say we don't have that history. I mean, look, they're investigating the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for, you know, deputies who are gang members right now. So I would say it's, it's not unforeseen, right? Yeah,
right.
No, not as extensive.
Not as extensive. But I mean, yeah, obviously it happens. I've known too many cases here where that's happened all across the country. So I should have said it's not as we don't have as extensive a history. You know, in
That is
Mexico, for
that
example, it's
is
just kind of accepted that you're going to bribe a cop.
right. No,
You know,
I think we have a mostly functional civil society, and
yeah,
I don't think that can be said for Mexico, unfortunately.
no, no, no. And on that note, we're going to wrap up because we set aside a half hour and we're a smidge over that. But you know what? This is actually what it's like when Cam and I call. When we have our call in the
Right?
morning, it's going to be like, hey, it's only going to be like a few minutes. We're just going to talk about what stories we got lined up, and it's 15 minutes, half hour. It's not unusual at all.
Yeah, it's like,
So
oh, I gotta
this
hop
is
off
what
so I can
happens when
start
we
writing. Exactly.
so, Cam, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, man, anytime, and yeah, let's try to figure out how to do one of our morning meetings as a camming company here soon. We'll do
Yeah,
that. That'll be fun.
that'll be fun. That'll be fun. We'll figure it out.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, man. All right. So, thank you again for joining me today. Thank you for Cam for joining me. Like I said, Cam and I've known each other for a while now. We worked together for a while. So, uh, with that, we're going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will see you next week.